Now, the start of the Republican National Convention 2016 was billed as the biggest night in Melania Trump's life. I'm not sure by whom, but it was billed that way. Donald Trump's wife was later accused of plagiarizing a speech given by Michelle Obama at the 2008 Democratic National Convention when she endeared Barak Obama to the United States and indeed the world. This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. I'm joined via Skype this evening by a man who knows about foreign policy. He's been a US diplomat, J. Brooks Spector, the associate editor of the Daily Maverick, to discuss the American elections and will it be won by the least dodgy spouse or the least dodgy candidate, I wonder. Poor Melania Trump. You've got to feel a little bit sorry for her, Brooks Spector, or not?
Well, I think so. I mean, this was her first big speaking moment to not just a group of several thousand people in a convention hall, but to about 35 million Americans via television, and then who knows how many more around the world watching on TV or following it along the internet. And it turned out that just before she gave the speech on the airplane coming to Cleveland, apparently she said she'd worked on it for weeks. It was mostly hers, and she was very proud of it. Then she gave it, and then people began to notice an unsettling similarity in many places to what Michelle Obama had said about her husband 8 years ago when he was first seeking the presidency. And it got worse because as the night wore on, the campaign said it was the fault of a couple of staffers or speechwriters. And then Paul Manafort, who's the new chairman of the overall campaign, got on television at 6 o'clock in the morning in the US the next morning saying, wait a minute, there wasn't anything copied at all. Common use words. And what this really shows is the depths to which Hillary Clinton will go whenever a strong woman tries to take her on. And while they're doing that, of course, all the news channels are showing the two women giving the speeches alternatively, and the startling similarity of the words is quite striking.
It is most certainly striking, and plagiarism, of course, held up as to blame initially, then the denials from the camp. Nobody gets fired. It suggests that Mrs. Trump wrote the speech herself. Indeed, she said that she spent weeks writing it. So, yeah, does it do any damage, though, to Donald Trump? I would think in a political environment as divisive as what the United States political environment is right now, there are not that many marginal Republicans and there are not that many marginal Democrats in this particular vote who might be put off by a little bit of a cheat.
True, except what it does show was a greater sense that the campaign itself wasn't entirely in control of the way this event got shaped. One of the senior correspondents following all this said on TV the other night, said, look, this is 4 days when the campaign is absolutely in control of every minute, every second, everything that happens. And if you bobble something, then that shows the weak links in the process, because going forward into the campaign in general, and then assuming you were to win the presidency, if you cannot handle simultaneous problems, crises, eruptions of this kind and that kind, then it's an awkward and telling moment. Now, the other side of the argument is we've largely entered a post-factual zone where somebody like Donald Trump can charge almost anything and largely get away with it because he brazens his way through the thing. So it's hard to tell precisely how this is going to play out. But if you noticed last night, our time, last night in the US and early morning our time, all of the speakers, except two of the Trump children, almost all of them got up, and all they really did was excoriate Hillary Clinton. Speech after speech after speech. Somebody actually kept track of this, and they say there were 125 mentions of Hillary Clinton to 65 mentions of Donald Trump.
It's extraordinary the lengths to which people will go, of course, to undermine the other candidate, particularly if you're feeling a little bit vulnerable. Now, in the race to the White House, historically, has the spouse been a factor? Is the spouse a factor this time round?
Well, I think it's clear that in Barack Obama's case, Michelle Obama was so good with crowds, was so, what shall we say, she was so vital and and thoroughly warm, whether in person or by, through the mass media, that it clearly helped bring African Americans to Barack Obama's camp as the genuine article. Now, translate that into precise numbers of votes, who knows? Jacqueline Kennedy, if you go back a lot further, clearly had a significant impact on the way the country saw Jack Kennedy when he ran in 1960. And if you go back even further to Franklin Roosevelt, his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, had a very strong impact on what were then seen as marginalized communities, the unemployed, of which there were a great number, obviously, Great Depression, African Americans in the North who obviously could vote, but not in the South, perhaps. And the First Lady can help. The First Lady doesn't make or break, or the presidential candidate's wife, shall we say, doesn't make or break a campaign, but it's a nice thumb on the scale when it comes right down to it, if it's done well.
Well, we got the unprecedented situation where Bill Clinton is the presidential spouse, the candidate's spouse. In this particular case, the roles were reversed just a decade and a half ago. Does that make a difference to the Hillary camp?
Well, they have to figure out what to do with Bill Clinton because he's larger than lifetime, and he's been one of the great public orators and campaigners of my generation and maybe a generation or two before that. And the real problem for them, and it's kind of a curious challenge, they have two really good orators on their side. They have the incumbent president, who's excellent with many, many audiences, and they have the former president in the shape of Bill Clinton. The current candidate, Hillary Clinton, may look a little subdued by contrast. And so they have to now script this whole thing through very carefully. Where do they deploy these forces, with whom, and in what way will they be in tandem, together, or separately? That'll be quite an interesting mathematical issue for them.
The elections in the United States just around the corner. It's election day in November. How close a run thing does it look to be?
Well, if you believe in the gospel of Nate Silver, this is a man who made his name by calling the 2008 election almost to six significant figures in the final vote totals. His methodology is to take all the polls that are taken, all the polls by all the different reliable polling agencies and institutions and organizations, bring them together. Then cast out the outliers, the ones that seem to be well off the standard curve, and then from that begin to extract the data. The real challenge in the United States, of course, is that the national popular vote total is not actually the way you count up who wins. It's how you win state by state by state, and so then the calculations get more complicated. But if you take the Nate Silver approach, he's giving it Hillary Clinton somewhere around 4%, maybe as high as 7%, maybe as low as just a couple, but clearly in the lead. And somebody else gave odds and said Hillary Clinton 71% likely to win. I'm not quite sure how that translates when you go to your local bookmaker, but nevertheless. The math of it, though, is interesting when you apply that math to the actual geography, because states tend to be traditionally Democratic or increasingly traditionally Republican, which means there are only about 10 states that are, in general terms, in play. And that's where the campaigns, both of them, will spend a lot of time. And that's where you'll begin to see some really intense polling in places like Virginia and Florida and Colorado, and perhaps a couple of the Midwestern states, and probably Pennsylvania. And they have different characteristics, but the key that they have in common is that the number of people supportive of Democrats and supportive of Republicans tends to be about the same. Let me add one other footnote, Bruce. There are two other parties that have significant presences, insignificant in terms of electoral weight, but significant in terms of how they may affect things. Former Governor Gary Carter is leading the Libertarian Party, which is, as its name implies, And there are some people who think it may win as many as 10% of the popular vote and do rather well in a number of Western and Southwestern states. And then there's Jill Stein, who is running as the candidate for the Green Party. Green Party, as in the Green parties in Europe, for example. Now, they may not pull as much as 10%, they may pull rather less, but in a really close race in a couple of those battleground states, Libertarian and Green Party candidates may actually have an effect on the way in which those states go, Democratic or Republican. We're really going to find out much more of the next 110 days, I think it is.
It's coming close. I mean, Hillary Clinton is a comfortable fit within the Democratic Party. She slots in there very well. However, we've got on the other side Donald Trump, who's not a comfortable traditional Republican candidate. Will that count against him?
Well, if you watch the convention so far, who have been noticeable by their absence at this convention among Republicans? The only two living ex-presidents who are Republicans, father and son Bush, and the governor, Republican governor of the state of Ohio, where the convention is taking place, John Kasich. That says to me, even if on the convention floor there is more unity than there is division, once you get outside the room, there is a significant sense that, oh dear, is he really our candidate for our Republican Party, or has he simply led a hostile takeover like a corporate raider might do on a vulnerable but expensive company?
Where else have we heard that happen politically? Brooke Spector, Associate Editor of the Daily Maverick. Thank you very much for joining us this evening on the MoneyMakers. Be more Mavericks and anti-establishment candidates, and of course, who will be the president of the White House? 110 days to go. Same old with a backup of Bill Clinton under Hillary, or does it go to the alleged plagiarist and the guy with the big hair? Until next time, thank you so much for watching. Good night.